Welcome to Plymouth 400 Conversations. I'm Michele Pecoraro, and I will be your host for this series. The 400th commemoration of our nation has inspired a body of creative work: poetry, film, literature, and art. This series will explore several of these projects and how they contribute to the historic, educational, and cultural legacies of the Plymouth 400 commemoration. In this episode, we're going to meet Mary Shields, the creative mind behind a series of children's books that uses a lovable pair of characters to explore Plymouth Colony and its people. So Mary, you've been working on this for a long time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the story world that you have created for the Barnicle and Husk series?
Well, first of all, Michele, I want to thank you for having me. And it's interesting when I think back about the storyline for this first book, because it really was mixing up a lot of my own personal experiences. And it all became the recipe for this little world that I was creating. It all started in the early 1990s.
Wow.
I moved to Manomet, and it was just learning more about Plymouth in the 1990s. There was a sense of things that were just happening around my world that had me launch this world of Barnicle and Husk. And I'll explain more about some of those personal experiences. But this is about a cat, Barnicle the cat, an orange striped cat stowaway on the Mayflower. He made his way across the Atlantic. And here in the New World, there was a young orphaned field mouse. And that field mouse was in peril. It was distraught. And a young Wampanoag girl happened to walk by and heard the whimpers and cries. She picked up this mouse and she put it into her pocket after she was petting him a bit and brought him back to her village. So this first book in this series is more about the Wampanoag life, the village, and just what happened back in the year 1620. You know, we all know that we have been taught for decades, centuries, about the pilgrims and how they came here, but no one, I feel, until this moment in time, we have really pushed the truth out. And it's because there are just so many people that are passionate about making sure the real truth gets out there. So I was using these characters as that vehicle because I think you have to start with the youngest kids. And those kids hopefully will teach parents, because I know when I was in school, I never learned the real truths and the tragedies. So my little world I created, I wanted it to teach. I wanted people to learn, and I wanted them to enjoy the artwork and the journey. And the thing that seems to be the most common feedback I get from adults, they'll say, wow, I never knew this really happened.
That's amazing, Mary. You know, I've known you a long time, and I think I've known Barnicle and Husk as long as I've known you. So I do know it's been a long time. What was your inspiration? How did the story first come to be? What things happened to you that inspired you to write this?
Okay, so at the risk of sounding like I'm a little bit crazy, in the 80s, I happened to be out in the woods, and I don't even know what made me look down and poke around in the leaves, but I actually found this tiny, and when I mean tiny, it might have been the size of my pinky. It looked like a pink shrimp with like a blue coating over its eyes. I had no idea what this thing was. I pick it up, I look at it, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, now what? So I realized this poor thing was going to die. I happened to have some powdered dog milk that I diluted with water and took a little rag and made a point, and I would hand feed this mouse every day for like every 2 hours. And I actually grew a mouse. I mean, it was kind of amazing, but the day that the mouse opened its eyes, and I don't know, it feels like it was weeks, but it was probably maybe 10 days or so. But this mouse ran up my sleeve. I pulled it out and I said, okay, it's time. I named him Rembrandt, but didn't matter. But I put him in a cage saying, all right, tomorrow you're going to go free. And unfortunately, I had a cat named Picasso who had other plans for the mouse. So it had a really bad ending. But the thing is, this upbringing of a mouse ties in tightly to running deer. And running deer was actually a name I was given back in 1994. I was looking for another place to live. I had never heard of the town Manomet, which was kind of surprising. I grew up in Marshfield, but I just didn't know about Manomet. I saw this house of interest that I wanted to rent, and I go down to this place and I walk around. I fell in love with it. I knock on the door. A woman came to the door, opened it up. Now, mind you, I had never seen this woman before in my life. She opened the door and she said, running deer, we have been expecting you. And I'm thinking, okay, this is really, really strange. But this woman, her name was Solveig, and she was a mystic from Norway. And she told me that I belonged at this property because I was running deer. She was morning sun. Together, we would work and like supervise or oversee the village when the men went off. And I questioned her and I said, so what tribe? And she said, Iroquois. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to go with it. But anyway, she wanted me to buy the house. And I was like, no, I want to rent it. But these people actually said, no, you have to be here. And walking thunder is going to be your spirit that will guide you. So that was an unusual thing that happened. Wow. For sure. And then I made my move to Plymouth. And all these years of working with some entertainment giants that work with characters, when I moved to Plymouth, I'm like, hey, this is kind of a tourist town. And so my wheels started to spin, and I started formulating this big master plan in my head. And unfortunately, I've been accused of being an engine with no brakes, and I just keep going and going and going. And, I definitely was kind of getting ahead of myself. And I think it's going to be maybe 2000 or 1999, I actually had walkabout costumes created because the local hospital asked if they would help celebrate their 100th birthday. And the day my characters arrived, I was working with a company out in Hollywood. The boxes came in and I opened them. It felt like I just gave birth. I mean, it was just an experience that was like, wow, these characters actually are real. So that's kind of how it happened. And then I ended up getting a building in downtown Plymouth, which became the Plymouth Waterworks building where I keep my company. And that's where the characters work out of. They live there. They're the guards. They stand at the door and greet people when they come in. So hopefully that answered a little bit about some of the things that happened. And there certainly were more things, but those are kind of some things that are touched on in the book that people might have said, how did that ever come to be?
Well, that is quite a journey to these characters. And you're right, you have oftentimes said, I feel like I'm their mother, they're my children. And I think you have treated them that way. Now, you mentioned your background is in graphic design. I know that. And you had just mentioned that you have a business in Plymouth. Would you tell us a little bit about what your career path has been and how did you come to be an author?
So first off, I would say I'm not, I don't consider myself an author. I almost feel like I'm a creator of visual things. After I graduated college, I was an art teacher right out of school, in middle school. And after 2 years, I decided that I was not programmable and the bells got to me, the constant bells changing, move to another class. And I'm like, I can't deal with the bells. So I started my own company, Shields Design. And for over a decade, I worked very closely with a major theme park down in Florida, along with some professional sports teams. And, all along the way, we've been involved with like healthcare and manufacturing and retail. But it was the experience of working with some of the folks down in Orlando that really gave me the knowledge of, how do you take a character, or how do you do merchandise for a character, what are the things that you can do with them. So it was all of that stuff that happened. I was able to apply that knowledge and just use it for my characters. Now, my company, which is the largest tenant at Plymouth Waterworks, we are definitely committed to the community. We give back to the community. And my role is to be able to put the right teams in place. And that's why I keep saying I'm not an author, and I have writers that I work with. And in the case of Barnicle and Husk, especially going forward with the adventure series, I've joined forces with Peter Arenstam, since he is truly an author.
Very good. Now, earlier in our conversation, you had mentioned that things about this book and about our commemoration were very different this time around. And I know you had, you were lucky enough to have access to some Native people, and you spoke with Earl Mills and with Linda Coombs. How did all of that come about? And also, how did that influence the books themselves?
So back in the mid 90s, now I've been hatching this plan in my head, and actually some of it has been put to paper and illustrations. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I am not Native American. So how can I really get down to some of the details here? So what I did is I really just did some research, and I happened to stumble on a name, and it was Earl Mills, and Earl Mills Sr., and said Wampanoag Elder, said Chief Flying Eagle. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, maybe I'm going to try to contact this guy. So I call him, I get an answering machine, and quite frankly, I can't imagine anyone returning my call. I was a nervous wreck. I probably made absolutely no sense. I was all over the place. But this guy called me back, and that shows you something about his character, too. Earl and I have become amazing friends, and it's maybe 20 years now. Did I get the math right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would go down to see Earl in Mashpee. We would go for long walks. We would talk. It was like the ultimate storytelling. And I felt so privileged that here I had a Mashpee elder spending his time talking with me. And he was so on board with my project, and he just was I can't say enough things about him. I mean, his personality was just beyond. He was a teacher himself. He's an entrepreneur, a chef. He actually is a real author. Son of Mashpee is one of his books. We have, he has Talking with the Elders. But one of the things when I was talking with Earl one day, and we were sitting down by the side of a pond, and it wasn't far from the Flume restaurant. But I told him how upset I was about the whole Frank James situation, that suppressed speech.
And that would be the National
Earl,
Day of Mourning, correct?
exactly.
Right.
Earl actually brought me to see Frank James.
Wow.
And I went to Frank James' home with Earl, and we were sitting on the couch and we were talking. And the thing that I thought was really kind of funny is the bantering that would go back and forth with Frank and with Earl. And it wasn't until you get up close and you can see in someone's eyes the anger, the pain, and it was unfortunate that that speech never got out there. But I feel like now the truth is coming out, and I owe a lot of that to Plymouth 400 and to people like Linda Coombs and to Paul and Stephen Peters. So it's just, it is like this journey. But Earl Mills, he has a soft spot in my heart and always will. But there's also someone else who is extremely important in this lesson that I've gone through, and that is Linda Coombs. Linda Coombs, I feel like, is a quiet, unsung hero for Plymouth 400. Linda, although the best research came from Earl and Linda, people from Plymouth 400 board, some of them are not even with us today anymore. But Linda, by far, was my toughest teacher, and rightly so. I'm a bad student. I kind of, I'll push the envelope, but it was great because Linda was there to keep me in check, because I really did have a responsibility as an author when I'm representing a culture that I'm not part of, to make sure it's culturally accurate and I'm not stereotyping people. And because I did make those mistakes, and some of the illustrations that I put together for the very first kind of, it wasn't published, but it was like my first draft, they were offensive, but I couldn't understand why.
Right.
And Linda taught me those lessons. So I will always say she is the one that my lessons learned. And just for background on Linda, she's an Quina-Wampanoag. She's a museum educator. She is a Wampanoag historian. She also is trusted consultant, a Plymouth 400 member, and she's my friend. And she has devoted so much time to the whole Indigenous awareness program throughout Plymouth 400, but beyond. And so kudos to Linda, and kudos to you, Michele, because I honestly don't think it would have happened unless you took the bull by the horns and forced this issue. And that is part of the reason why I joined Plymouth 400. And it was because I knew that was a message I was passionate about, going back almost 2 decades. And I can't believe this has been like 2 decades in the making. But, one of the things about lessons learned, it's twofold. It was lessons I learned, but then also the lessons that were taught. And you'll see in the chapter book, there's an impact statement from Linda Coombs, and it actually will, so I can back up. That impact statement, I had a consultant who was a publisher, and I can't tell you how many times they asked me to remove that from the book. And
Wow.
they said it didn't belong there because this was a children's book. I was so adamant and I said, no, it is staying. So again, I guess I don't follow the rules, but if I did, it wouldn't be in there. And I was so, it had to be there. And that back matter of the book, you have your glossary, you have the impact statement, you have about Plymouth 400, but that impact statement is written by Linda Coombs, and it's very important. And the children may not, the youngest children may not read it, but certainly the parents and teachers will.
Mary, you know, we all have these unintentional biases that we all have them, everyone. And that's really what you have delved into. And I really appreciate you for that. That is a big part of what we're doing at Plymouth 400 as well, is just balancing the history, balancing the stories of these two cultures. I want to get back to Barnicle and Husk, and briefly, because I could talk to you all day, but we don't have all that time. So I just wanted to ask you to give us a little background on who is Barnicle and who is Husk.
Okay, so
briefly,
just for starters, it's very important people know that both Barnicle and Husk, let's call them ethnic neutral. I did not want a cat that someone would say, oh, they're from the Netherlands, or, you know, or he's from England, whatever. And Husk, although born here in the New World, I never wanted anyone to ever think that I'm implying that Husk, a mouse, is a Wampanoag. So that is the most important thing. But Barnicle's kind of a crusty, salty cat. And he kind of is, he's like the bad boy. So you kind of have this little dynamic going on, because Husk is the exact opposite. Husk, his whole personality, he grew up in the Wampanoag village. So that was his life. He was never anywhere before. On the other hand, Barnicle was jumping on ships, going all over the place. You know, he had worldly experience. Husk only had the experience of the village, where people treated him kindly, made sure he was warm. And Husk actually got his name because when Running Deer found him in the cornfields, when she picked him up, he had this little tuft of hair that was coming off the top of his head, and she was playing with it, and she said, I'm going to name you Husk because you remind me of the corn silks. But they are characters that I would say of the two, Husk is the adult.
Very good. Well, they are delightful characters, and I can see from your background where you got them from. We have a little bit of time, and you are so creative, Mary, that I know that you have a whole pack of ideas. You have a project that's been in your head for a long time, and can you tell us a little bit about that? It has to do with some of your background with that big company down in Florida and others.
All right, so I kind of think I know where you're going with this one, but again, coming back to the engine with no brakes. And this is also where I made a mistake, because I told you I'm not a real author. I took things to the extreme, so I probably made it that a publisher may not be interested in me, or an organization, because I have pushed this to the limit. But because of my over a decade of experience, I actually created something I call America's Storyland. And America's Storyland, it would end up having, you enter this world where Barnicle and Husk are your ambassadors. I guess you could kind of equate it to, hey, Walt Disney said it all started with a mouse.
Right.
So maybe Husk has a shot. I don't know, but this would be a park where you enter and you are able to experience, and this is geared towards families and the really youngest of the younger audience.
Right.
We have some great places in Plymouth, like Plantation, but this is going to be brought down to the level where the kids can actually play on a replica Mayflower that might be many, many stories high.
Wow.
There may be interactive learning that goes on inside this. You may take a Mashoon ride and go through a Wampanoag village
Oh,
and
Mary.
see things that are happening. It could have an area for native arts and crafts. You could have themed retail stores, themed restaurants. You would have, it would just encompass everything that's in my head, having storytelling stages, maybe a theater, a movie that's running. You may have an observation deck that you can look out, and whether you're incorporating augmented reality or you seeing that Mayflower coming into the harbor. So there are a lot of things that Plymouth 400 was responsible for, creating content. And I just see this as an opportunity. But I'm a big dreamer,
Yeah,
and I don't want to stop dreaming.
I
So
know.
who knows what's going to happen? I
Well,
just, and if nothing happens, they can always become a wall mount in my studio. Just take the head behind. But
Mary,
it
you are
it's definitely something
delightful.
I'm passionate about.
You're so fun to talk to, and I thank you so much. I wish we had more time. Thank you, Mary, for being a guest of the show, and thank all of you for joining us for Plymouth 400 Conversations, produced and promoted in partnership with PAC TV and the Plymouth Center for Active Living. Special thanks to our sponsors and guests who have made this series possible. For more information about today's program and how to view other episodes, please visit our website, plymouth400inc.org. Looking forward to you joining us for our next conversation.